So today we are going to do the Valorant Champions Tour Stage 1 Masters Reykjavik predictions on this channel. And this is going to be a bit more of a podcast video. There isn't going to be too much like visually going on. So by all means, feel free to just put me on in the background and do something else if you wish. But yeah, we're just going to go through it. Obviously, the tournament starts tomorrow. Very excited. And so let's take a look at what we think will happen. We're going to go through each of the teams. We'll start with the playoff teams, the teams that are already through, and then we'll go to the group stages, and I will make my Pickems as well. And first off, let's just give a broad context overview of this tournament. I think that this is the most wide open tournament that Valorant has ever seen by quite some way, and I would not be that surprised if a team from a minor region won the tournament, or at least got to the final of the tournament. I would really not be surprised, and we'll talk about those teams that I think are likely to potentially do that. But the main reason I think that is because I think the two best teams in the world right now onto this tournament. Because I think if either Mech/Gambit or FPX were at this tournament, I know that Mech didn't actually qualify, but if either of those teams were at this tournament and had their full strength roster, I think that they would just roll everyone, to be honest. I think that they really would destroy everyone. But that's just me. I really do think that if FPX were here, they would just win this tournament and really destroy everyone and maybe not even lose a map. That's how good FPX were playing. And so it's a real shame that they aren't here, because I really do believe that. So we'll just go in with what we have. And so let's start with G2. And G2 as a team, we're a bit up and down, I would say. If we take a look at their results, and go from like the group stages, they beat the teams that they perhaps should beat, and then lost to Ascend and Fnatic in the group stage. Then they lost to Liquid. Then they went on a tear and, qualified for Iceland, and then they kind of got dominated by FPX and lost 3-1 in the grand final. And that's what G2 are to me. And this is, I think, why the tournament is pretty wide open, because if that one slot is taken by FPX, who have been a very consistent and very strong team throughout the entire thing, then I'd say, yeah, they're going to win the tournament. But it's G2 who are the #1 EMEA seed, who are a bit up and down, and you can beat. And if you prepare for well, they can be beaten, as has been shown. But at the same time, they also have the potential to go on just an absolute run. And that's the thing, I think, with G2 and a lot of teams in this tournament, is that they're a bit inconsistent. They, can go on an absolute run, an absolute tear, but can also at the same time, just lose any game potentially because they're not feeling it. They're off for whatever reason. And I do think that G2 are one of the teams that I can absolutely see winning this tournament. If they play like they did in this three-match stretch against Mech, Liquid, and Fnatic, then yeah, they probably will win the tournament, because they only have to win 4 games if they go all the way through the uppers. So it absolutely could happen. I wouldn't be surprised if G2 did that in the slightest, but I also wouldn't be surprised if G2, dropped a series against a team you don't expect, and then, came up against a tough opponent in the lowers at some point and just are out of the tournament. That wouldn't surprise me at all either, because that's kind of who G2 are. They're a solid team that can go on a big run potentially, but they are also a bit inconsistent at times and can look shaky at certain times, and also lose, particularly if like Nuki and Mixwell aren't fragging out particularly well. They can just look pretty average sometimes. So it really could go either way with G2, and it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. So now let's move to the Guard, NA's favorite team, everyone's fairy tale story. Can the Guard go and win this whole tournament? Yeah, again, I would say that they're a team that probably could. Again, they only have to win 4 games, potentially, to win it all. So they definitely could if they get on that streak. And I do think the Guard are a bit of a hot streak team. I think that, if you catch them at the wrong moment, they will just destroy you. That's kind of, Sire's feeling it, things like that. Trent's just going mad, things like that. I do think, that they could just catch someone out and just kind of destroy them. And they wouldn't have to do it in that many games. Obviously, they are a very inexperienced team, and I think a lot of people have said, like, oh, it's almost a punishment for them that they aren't getting to play in groups, because no matter who comes out of the groups, they're probably going to be playing a team that is about as good as the Guard. And the Guard, they might be a bit cold, they might be nervous because it's either their first LAN or, one of very few LAN experiences they've ever had. It's in a different place, it's a different setting, it's a different environment, hearing the other team shout at you across the way. It could go wrong for the Guard in a way. But I also think that the Guard are a very fundamentally solid team. And I think that is something actually with a lot of teams that we see here, is a bit lacking at times, that those fundamental elements of certain teams isn't as strong as the Guard. But I do think the Guard have been, again, fortunate, because if FBX or Mech or someone like that, I think those two teams, if they were at this tournament, the Guard would struggle mightily against those teams. It's no surprise to me that Optic, the kind of most EMEA team out of NA, are the team that have given the Guard problems, because that kind of like slower, methodical, grindy mindset of, of we're going to tactically outplay you can get to the Guard. Luckily for them, I don't think there are too many teams here at this tournament that are like that. Optic, maybe Fnatic, DRX maybe, might be the only three that could fit into that category, and everyone else is willing to take the challenge and say, no, we're just going to fight you. And that I think plays into the Guard. And so if they can, catch the right teams and, maybe get a nice, easier schedule for them, might not even be like an easy schedule, but just one that suits them a bit better, they could go very far in this tournament, and it wouldn't surprise me at all. And now let's come to my favorite team, and that is Paper Rex. And Paper Rex are a wonderful team, in my personal opinion. They've been on an absolute tear in APAC. They are very clearly the best team in APAC. They haven't lost this whole year, so, they've been doing extremely well, and are the APAC #1 seeds, and they get to go straight into the playoff side of the tournament, which I think is good for Paper Rex. Unlike the Guard, I think that is going to benefit Paper Rex quite a lot, because they are going to have time to cook up a bunch of weird and wacky stuff. And Paper Rex, to me, are the team that, if you are a team that feels like we can win this tournament, we have a good chance in this tournament, Paper Rex are the team you do not want to go up against, because I can absolutely see them just upsetting an EMEA or NA team that was, doing potentially really well for the rest of the tournament. Comes up against Paper Rex, who play bizarre comps, who do weird stuff on you, and you're just left going, wait, what? We're in the lowers? Like, I could absolutely see Paper Rex doing that to some team. I think certain teams will not want to run into Paper Rex at all, because they just have that potential to do wild stuff on you, and they'll make the game a coin flip. Now, you might win that coin flip, but if you think of yourself as a favorite, you don't want to go into a coin flip game. You'd rather just play a normal game of Valorant where you're the favorite. But Paper Rex won't let you do that. So they are a team to me that, if I was an underdog in this tournament that had got through the group stages and, maybe didn't expect to, then I want Paper Rex, because they'll give me a coin flip. But as I say, if you see yourself as a favorite, you don't want that coin flip. And that's what Paper Rex, I think, will do, because they're just weird and they're wacky, and they're probably feeling themselves, having, just constantly been winning in the Apex scene. So they're probably feeling themselves. They probably have some weird, wacky ideas coming into this tournament. They, have a mindset, I think, these APAC players, of like, we don't really care. We're just here to have fun. Obviously, we see with Benkai, and I'm interested to see what stunts he pulls out, obviously, with the toothpaste last time. I'm interested to see what he'll do this time. But yeah, I think that Paper Rex have some real upset potential to them. Can they win the whole thing? That might be a stretch too far, I think, for them. Could they get to the semis or the grand final? Yeah, I honestly do think that they could, because, as I said, this tournament is very wide open. Now let's come to Loud, who I think everyone is calling the dark horse. In fact, they're so dark of a horse that I think they don't even qualify as a dark horse anymore, because people are legitimately, like, a lot of people are picking them to win the tournament. Now, if a lot of people are picking you to win a tournament, are you really a dark horse at that point? Because Loud have been perhaps the most dominant of any team in terms of just, I mean, they've never lost a series, and they've only lost a couple of maps. They are, the team that really was the most dominant by far in terms of their own regional qualifiers. They absolutely destroyed everyone. They are clearly the best Brazilian team. And I think if you're a Loud fan, you should be seeing yourselves not as a dark horse, but like just a legit contender. If Loud can't do well in this tournament, that makes me very worried for the overall Brazilian scene, because this is their best chance. They are coming in, they have a very strong team. They have the classic kind of Brazilian fragging power that, a lot of Brazilian teams do, but they actually have a lot more structure and ideas and plans that perhaps we haven't quite seen before from some of the Brazilian teams. And I think that that is a potential scary moment. I think that Loud are a very strong team. They aren't all that experienced. There are some players they have with experience, and they have some very young players as well. So it'll be interesting to see how they adapt to the LAN environment. They could feel some nerves, kind of like the Guard, and especially because there is maybe a bit of expectation on them to do well all of a sudden. That maybe they might get a bit tight in those crucial moments. But I do think that they are just a very solid team. That if you get into a fragging match with them, you'll almost certainly lose. And then at times, they can play very well tactically as well. Now, I say at times because it's not always. Sometimes, they do get into a bit of a brawl. And as I said, in Brazil, they can win those brawls all the time. Now, against other, very good international teams, they might not be able to win nearly as many of those brawls as before. You watch Loud play and they get plenty of just random clutches because their players are just better than the other players in Brazil. They get those clutches that, other teams probably wouldn't give to them at this international tournament, things like that. So Loud are a team that, again, can definitely win this tournament. But I'm not quite sure that they have maybe the consistency. Again, it's kind of similar to G2. They could do very well, but I see in moments in their game where, better teams than perhaps some of these other Brazilian teams would punish them. And instead of, winning a map, and winning rounds that they shouldn't win, they would lose maps. And, they haven't really felt losing. So it'll be interesting to see what happens if they do, get 2-0'd by a team and go into the lows. Does that affect them? Because they've never lost a game before. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. But they are definitely a strong shout for this tournament. Definitely up there in terms of the favorites, but are a very, very solid team indeed. And now let's go to the group stage teams, and we'll start with Fnatic. And when it comes to Fnatic, well, Fnatic, I think, are the true dark horse to this tournament because a lot of people are, writing off Fnatic. The Xerxia situation, time of recording, still aren't quite aware. I know that he is on his way to Iceland, but I'm not actually sure if he's going to be able to play in that first game. That is obviously a big deal. But by the sounds of it and by just kind of like my own intuition, he'll probably at least be available for the second game, I would have thought. Or if not, if they get to the playoffs, certainly by then, I would have thought so. So we'll have to see where the Dirk situation is. Obviously, they still do have a sub coming in for Brave, who can't go. And so a lot of people, have kind of just slept on Fnatic, I think, a bit. Because I think that Fnatic... Here's another thing. If Fnatic get close to how they were playing in groups, they'll win this tournament. Honestly, and if they play like they did in that game against Mech, they'll win this tournament without losing a map. Like, if they played like they did in this series, they won't lose a map, to be honest. Like, it won't even be close. If they play like they did in groups, they'll win the tournament. They'd lose a map, but they'll win the tournament. If they played like they did in these last couple games, they won't win a game. So Fnatic are kind of a team, and then they have subs now as well, which makes it a bit different, and obviously the preparation won't be quite as good, and all of that, and they'll have to get used to the team chemistry and all of that. So it's like, they're a team that could do anything. They could easily win this tournament. They could easily go out straight away, and they could easily do anything in between. They are the true question mark to this whole thing, and I honestly have no idea how it will go for Fnatic. I personally... I'm on the idea, Fnatic were known as kind of a LAN team in the past, that they had done better on LAN than they had before, and if you get them on LAN, they will do well. And they have, more LAN experience than most teams here. So I think that Fnatic are a team that I think will do well, personally, in this tournament. I think that this will be kind of the big thing that everyone will have got wrong, that a lot of people are saying, yeah, if they have Xerxia, they'll do well. But I think they will actually do well no matter what. And obviously with the kind of news that Xerxia will be coming back at some point, I think that they will perform pretty well in this tournament. Fnatic, I think that Boaster, Mystic were incredible comparatively to where they were, from before to where they came into this qualification cycle. I think I've seen big improvement from those two players. Obviously their sort of tactical structure is way ahead of pretty much every other team at the tournament. They have the best ideas, and obviously without Xerxia that will be a bit of a problem, because Xerxia is kind of often, if Fnatic it's not going great, they can just sort of rely on Xerxia every so often to just win them a map on his own. And without that, that could cause some problems, but I think as long as it's only in the group stages and they're playing against perhaps some weaker teams, then that will be okay for them. It's okay that they will get through it and be able to qualify either way. So if they can get past the groups, I feel pretty good for Fnatic, to be honest. I think that they could be the team that actually comes out of this and looks pretty good. I wouldn't be surprised at all if they won it. But then again, I say all of this, it wouldn't be a shock if they just went out straight away and those subs weren't, doing it, and they played like they did in these last two games where it looked like they didn't really care. Now, I don't know if they didn't know that these games actually meant anything, but if they did, then that is perhaps more worrying than if they didn't, because if they did, that means that they just played absolutely horrendously. If they didn't, maybe that just means that they just didn't care and didn't try, which is, honestly, that's what it looked like. And now let's come to Team Liquid, the final EMEA team. And Liquid are a team that I think everyone, I mean, speaking of dark horse, are they the dark horse? I mean, their logo is a dark horse, but I don't quite think so. Liquid have problems, real structural problems as well. Now, they still have very solid players. This is the thing. If a team like Loud had Liquid's, players and played like Liquid, everyone would say the same thing, right? Like, oh, they have some really great fraggers. They're all really cracked and they can all win rounds on their own, and they're all crazy good. And I think it's because they are an EMEA team that obviously that expectation is a bit higher, that people maybe think, well, Liquid aren't that good because they get beaten by teams in their own region. Whereas I think if they were a minor region team, everyone would be saying, oh, this Liquid team is really quite good. I think it's just that expectation, because I think Liquid still have a ton of talent. They're a very talented team, but again, clearly it's kind of the same thing that I said with Loud, where they can just be very inconsistent in terms of their kind of mid-game calls, and their kind of tactical play can sometimes just be off. I've made multiple videos about when it's off, to be honest. So yeah, that is still a big issue for them. Sliggy, the coach, has talked about their IGL problem. To me, it goes deeper than just an IGL problem. Like, there's a clear role problem in the team. In terms of duelists, sometimes Scream plays duelists, sometimes it's Yampy, sometimes it's Soulcast. In terms of controllers, sometimes it's Yampy, it's always Link, but then sometimes it's also Navera when he plays Brimstone on certain maps. Like, what? I don't understand what's going on. Scream doesn't seem to have like a definitive role that he's like really good at playing. Yampy wants to op on whatever character he plays, so sometimes he plays Jet or Chamber to allow that, but then on other maps he doesn't, because he's more comfortable on other agents. On certain maps he plays pretty much every single agent, it seems, which sounds like a good thing, but it's actually not when all of your players are swapping around. Like, to have one player do that, maybe that's fine. But to have like multiple players, like Soulcast is going from Duelist to Sova, and then, to Breach, and just everything in between. And, like, it's just a weird mess, to be honest, Liquid. They just need some more structure, and they've talked about their IGL problems as well. And I think that that's just part of it. But we'll have to see, maybe if they can fix that in some way. They've been given a bit of time. Obviously, they aren't meant to be at this tournament. They could pull was it Denmark at 96? Could be 92, but one of them, where, they didn't qualify for that tournament, but then ended up winning it. So maybe Liquid will just go on an insane run. It wouldn't surprise me. Again, they have the talent. I don't quite think they've got what it takes to maybe win it all, but they are still a solid team that I could see doing pretty well, or definitely better than people expect. Now let's come to Optic, and here's the thing with Optic. Unlike pretty much every other team at this tournament, Optic might be the one where I can safely know how good they actually will be. Optic are a very consistent team, I think. They kind of give you the same sort of level. Maybe not map to map, because they're better on some maps than others, but in terms of just whole series, I feel like they play pretty much about the same. They don't have these crazy high peaks or low valleys. And most of the time, again, if an FBX or a mech were at this tournament, I would say that's a really bad thing for Optic, because I know that those teams are just a bit better than them. And so what will probably happen is Optic will go as far in the tournament. As soon as they meet those teams, they'll lose. Thankfully for Optic, those teams aren't at the tournament. And so that means that I think that Optic have a real chance of winning the whole thing, because they are a consistent team. And because of that, I am fairly certain that they will go pretty far. Maybe they won't win the whole thing, but they'll go pretty far. I'm pretty certain of that. And if they can catch certain teams, then, like a bad moment or whatever, then they'll just beat them, no matter who it is, because they'll be pretty consistent. Yay will do pretty well. They're a pretty experienced team. They have some LAN experience. So I expect them to, do pretty well. I would not be shocked. This is kind of a bit of a spoiler for what my predictions are, but I would not be shocked if Optic made the final, but lost to basically one of G2 or Loud or Fnatic or whatever team kind of comes out and is just on a mad roll. Could even be the Guard. I wouldn't be surprised if Optic lost to that team in the final. because they are the consistent team, but maybe one team just goes on a roll and can't be beaten, and Optic lose to that team. Kind of similar to Berlin in a way. They get to the final, they come up against, Gambit, who were on a roll at the time, they get smashed by them. That's kind of who Optic are, and I kind of see that continuing throughout this tournament as well. On to DRX, and DRX are a very interesting team. Again, didn't fully dominate Korea, but did pretty well. Did lose to Onslayers in this one game, but other than that, did pretty well and won their grand final against Onslayers 3-0. So kind of showed that they were more of the real deal. And what I've heard about DRX, who you might know as Vision Strikers, is that they aren't as good as the old Vision Strikers. I feel like this is just people playing on the fact that the old Vision Strikers won like 100 games in a row or whatever it was coming into the first Iceland, and this DRX, well, they haven't won 100 games in a row, so they aren't as good as the old Vision Strikers. And I don't really agree with that, because when you watch them play, they're pretty good. And they have good ideas, and they are one of the more tactically astute teams with some very good players, some good fraggers. Here's what I think of DRX. DRX are like a Durka away from like winning these tournaments. I really do think they can compete with the MEA teams and like the best North American teams. They can go punch for punch. They often kind of have lost those series 2-1 a lot of the time. And I think the reason is they're on their tactical level. They sometimes just lack that kind of, like I said with Durka, where he can just win a map for you. If things aren't going right for the rest of the team, Durka can sometimes just get so many kills. Or the same could be said about Ye as well. These kind of players who just can just win a map. They can just take over the game, and they can just go like 30-8 or whatever, and just win the game for you. DRX, I think, just lack that. They just lack that kind of one player who'll just drag them to a win every so often. And that means that they can be got at, when the tactical side of the game, when they're coming up against like a Fnatic or an Optic, who are on the same sort of tactical level to them, they will struggle against those teams, because those teams have a Ye or a Durka, who then will also just win them a map every so often. And so that is what I feel about DRX. Now, here's the thing. Again, they, and I'd put them alongside Optic, are another team that I kind of feel good about in terms of where they are. They're going to be consistent. They're going to be on a certain level. They have, LAN experience. They've been to multiple Valorant LANs at this point. So they're probably familiar with the whole process. And they'll probably do pretty well, I think, overall. But again, can they actually win the whole thing? I do think that they are just that sort of big fragging potential player away from being able to win the whole thing. But I wouldn't be surprised if they did pretty well, reach the semis, maybe even reach the final. And now let's come to the Japanese team, Zeta Division. And Japan has traditionally been the region that isn't as strong as the others, just is a bit behind in terms of its development. And unfortunately, I do think that that is still the case. You see things in Japan that I kind of associate with sort of like older, like earlier pro game Valorant. Some of the choices, some of the kind of team play isn't quite there all the time. Sometimes they have good ideas, and it's not always that it's, horrific or things like that, but just in moments, like on maps as well, some of their ideas are a bit off. They can be, a bit tactically naive at points as well. I'm not going to say that they're going to get rolled by everyone. They could do, but I don't think that will be the most likely thing. I think they'll be competitive, but clearly sort of be a bit lesser than the rest of the teams here. I do think they probably are the weakest team in the tournament, so my hopes aren't too high for Zeta, but we'll have to see, I guess. And now let's come to Xerxia, the other APAC team. And the way I would talk about Xerxia is that I think that they are similar to Paper Rex. I mean, the APAC style is very distinct in terms of its chaos. And again, if you get into a chaotic match against them, well, you're gonna be surprised. If you play with that kind of discipline and sort of normal structure that perhaps some of the MEA teams and the best NA teams show, then you should be okay, I think, against Xerxia, because I don't think they have quite as many good ideas or maybe as good execution as Paper Rex, but they still definitely can surprise. I would say like this: Paper Rex are going to turn every game into a coin flip. Xerxia are going to turn every game into like a weighted coin flip to you, where you'll have like, you know, a 60-40 chance of a coin flip or something like that. So you'll have a bit of a better chance against Xerxia than you would Paper Rex. But I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of Xerxia's games, or maybe all of Xerxia's games, were like 2-1s, where, you know, whatever map they've prepared, they've just got some really cool ideas on, and, you know, they'll catch you off guard and things like that. I wouldn't be surprised if Xerxia were able to do that. At the same time, you know, I do think that they just are a bit weaker than Paper Rex, and so my expectations for Xerxia aren't super high, but they could surprise a few. And now let's come to Crew. And Crew were perhaps the team that, in terms of where I thought they were to where they actually, what I saw some of the things, was perhaps the biggest gap, because I was coming off the Crew that obviously did really well in terms of the Champions Tournament, got to the semi-finals and all of that, and so I was expecting, wow, I wonder if this team is like, you know, taking it on you know, to that level and continued that progress, and, you know, is ready to really compete here. But in fact, I have actually come away from it feeling like the team from South America that is ready to compete is Loud, and that Crew maybe even have regressed. Because in some of this grand final, in particular against Leviathan, it did not look pretty. It did not look very good. It looked kind of like early Brazil and LATAM teams, you know, that kind of just play for frags and just taking random peaks, and they just want to fight every single fight that there is to fight, and they win some and they lose some, and, you know, they end up losing because of that. And so I wasn't too impressed. Not all of it. Some of it that I saw was pretty good. But, you know, maybe these results can be somewhat instructive, because Crew beat Leviathan 3-2. Leviathan then lost to Nip for that final place, who we'll talk about in a second. They lost 3-0 to Nip. And Nip got destroyed by Loud 3-0 as well. So maybe that's a bit of instructive of where these teams are. I don't quite know. But Crew are the team with the most experience on LAN. So it's very possible as well that, you know, maybe they're just really good on LAN. We've already seen them do pretty well in the tournament here. So maybe they'll just, you know, be more comfortable than everyone else, understand what's going on more than everyone else, and do, you know, perhaps better than people expect. But to be honest, I was not ultra impressed with Crew, and some of the things that I saw were a bit worrying and a bit alarming, especially from where I was coming in with my expectation of this team. So we'll have to see how it goes. But yeah, I'm almost a bit worried about Crew. And then Ninjas in Pajamas, and what I've seen from Ninjas in Pajamas is that they are an okay team. They kind of remind me a bit of the classical Brazilian team, whereas Loud kind of, you know, have that tactical element to their game. Ninjas in Pajamas feel more like your classic Brazilian. Well, we're mostly relying on our fragging potential here, which can, you know, win them maybe a game or two, but I'm not really expecting a deep run from this team, because I've seen it before from Brazilian teams that, you know, come into this tournament and, you know, they have a ton of fragging potential, but the tactical side of the game maybe isn't as strong as some of the other teams. And I think in general, Valorant is showing to be, the more you go down the tactical route, the better chance you have. The kind of like, you know, firepower, fragging potential, all of that, you know, you need some of that, but it's not as important as the kind of tactical elements and team play elements as the individualistic solo carry missions that some of these Brazilian teams can go on. And so my overall expectations for Nip isn't really too high, but I wouldn't be surprised if they won a game or two either. And so with that said, let's get into the pick'em. And as I just mentioned, my ideas for Nip aren't too high. And I'm probably a bit higher on Fnatic than most other teams. I do believe that Fnatic, even with the subs, maybe even without Durka, still will be able to, you know, have that tactical element over other teams. So I will go for Fnatic in this first game. And then DRX versus Zeta is probably the easiest game that I'm sure most people have picked DRX, and I will follow suit. I just think that they're the better team. Then coming to Fnatic versus DRX, this one is a really interesting one. And again, will probably depend on whether Durka is there or not. But even so, I'm feeling Fnatic. I am really feeling like they have a decent chance, and so I'm going to go for Fnatic qualifying out of and winning this first group. Maybe that's a bit hopeful of me. Maybe that's the EMEA in me feeling that. I do expect that Fnatic DRX will be a 2-1. I don't think it'll be a clean sweep. I think it'll be a very close game, but I do expect that Fnatic perhaps just have a little bit more than DRX there, particularly if Durka is back. If Durka is back for that game, I expect Fnatic will win. And then we come to the other side of the bracket, and I do expect Nip to just have the firepower over Zeta and be able to win that game, but then I do think DRX will have what it takes over Nip as well, and these are the two teams that will qualify that I would guess most teams have probably picked. And then coming to the other group, we come to Optic versus Xerxia. Now, Xerxia, I think, could upset a team, but I think that they've been drawn with perhaps the worst team they could have got. As I said, that consistent team in Optic, I think will just be able to manage Xerxia well enough. I do expect it to be close, actually. I don't think it will be a roll. I do think it will be pretty close. I wouldn't be surprised if it was a 2-1, and even a close 2-1 at that, but I ultimately do think that Optic will just have enough in their arsenal to be able to win that game. And then this one maybe is a bit of a surprise. Perhaps this is the closest game, you know, the most 50-50 game. But I am going to go with Liquid. I do think that Liquid just, again, have the potential. And if they were from another region, everyone would view them, you know, as a team like, oh wow, they've got 5 really, really good players, and they, you know, tactically sometimes it's not always there, but you know, hey, look, they've got some really good players. I think that that's what you'd say about Liquid if they were a Brazilian team. And so it's only because they get exposed against really good EMEA teams that, you know, people think, I don't know about Liquid. So I actually expect them to be able to defeat Crew. And as I said, I'm not super high on Crew. And then it comes to Optic versus Liquid. And, ooh, man, this one is going to be a doozy, I think. Again, because I think I'm just higher on Liquid than I would be. I think this will be, again, probably a 2-1, close one. But ultimately, Optic and their kind of, you know, that consistency is just able to overcome Liquid this time. Then we come to Xerxia versus Crew. And as I said, I think that Xerxia are well in for a surprise. I think their fragging potential is better than people expect as well. And so I am going to go Xerxia. And then we come to Xerxia versus Liquid. And this one, I think, could be a very, very spicy game indeed. And I'm actually still struggling right now to decide who I actually think would win this game, because I think it would be super, super, super close. Maybe I'm higher on Xerxia than others, and you know. But anyway, I do think that ultimately I am going to go with Liquid, but I think I wouldn't be surprised if I kind of want to pick Xerxia, just, you know, because it would be interesting, but I am going to go Liquid because I think it would be more correct. So that was my Pickems, and that was for the group stages. And in terms of the whole tournament, I am going to say that Fnatic will beat Optic Gaming in the final. And so I'm probably one of few people that has Fnatic winning the whole thing, but I think that they will get revenge. Icelandic revenge on an NA team will be the storyline that comes out from it all. I think Fnatic are a bit of a sleeper pick that, you know, not many people would have as their pick, but I just believe, you know, I think that Boaster and Mini and all of them will have the team ready, and maybe that's just the EMEA in me, but I think if they can just get to where they were at group stages, then they can really, really do quite a bit of damage in this tournament.